with structural directives, how to handle the conditions, looping conditions, iterations and conditions, how to handle them. Now, after understanding the structural directives, now another important one more is we need to understand about attribute directives. What are attribute directives and how to deal with the attribute directives. So directives. So technically, what is an attribute directive and how to use attribute directives? Attribute directive main purpose is it changes the appearance or behavior of an element. The main purpose is that means it can change the appearance or behavior of any element. Technically, attribute directives, we already used some attribute directives actually. We know about attribute directives actually. The attribute directives we already saw. If you remembered, we used NG model, right? NG model is actually an attribute directive only. Technically, NG model comes under the category of attribute directive. Some more attribute directives are there. We will see about how to work with them. We will see. Right. So, what is the purpose? What is the point? Is actually the main purpose is attribute directives in Angular. So attribute directives are actually used as attributes of elements, used as attributes of elements. Actually, they can change the appearance and behavior of HTML element. They can change the appearance or behavior of HTML element. HTML elements dynamically. So attribute directives can handle dynamically. So the commonly used attribute directives, usually what are the attribute directives and how do we deal with those attribute directives? Let's see. The built-in attribute directives that we have, inbuilt attribute directives generally. Usually the built-in attribute directives that we use, Angular attribute directives. Attribute directives are, so we have directives ng model. So we have ng class, we have ng style. These are the three important attribute directives. Technically, These are the attribute directives that we have. What is the purpose of these attribute directives and how to deal with these attribute directives? Let's see. NG model already we learnt. NG model we already learnt. We know about that. Technically, NG model we already discussed about that. So NG model is actually used for handling. Usually it is used for handling two-way binding technique. That means it binds the data, gets the data, and updates the data to the view. It's a two-way binding like technique. Right. Now, that's already we learned. Another important is NG class, NG style. These are all the Angular directives, right? So how to use these, we will see that. Generally, people call this concept as a style binding or class binding in Angular. In Angular, we generally call this as class binding and style binding, right? But actually that is style binding, class binding is managed by attribute directives only. Attribute directives only. So let's see how we can manage this. So class binding, style binding, two-way binding. So all that is all managed by these three. Well, already we know NG model. Already we know about NG model. Right? So the purpose of NG model is it binds a property with HTML DOM element. Property with HTML DOM element. It supports two-way binding. It supports two-way binding. So how it works already we discussed about that, right? It supports two-way binding. Technically how it is used, we know that. So input type is equal to text, and we are using NG model. NG model is equal to some name. So like this. That's already we discussed. Another important is we have NG class. NG class. Actually, NG class it is used to bind a CSS class dynamically to any HTML element. It is used to bind a CSS class dynamically to any HTML element, so that element can change its appearance dynamically according to state. That means an element should not have the same appearance every time. It should change according to state. This we regularly use in validations actually. We regularly use in validation. Suppose when you are designing like validation, if it is valid, then it should appear in green color. If it is invalid, then it should appear in a red color. Such dynamic changing we can manage by using this NG class. So technically we can apply a class, CSS class dynamically and change it. According to the state, it can change, right? Initially, we will see how it